It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and our guest speaker. Today's meeting will begin with opening remarks by Dick Costolo, after which Michael W. Farrell Jr. will moderate a conversation here on stage. Midway through the program, they will turn to the audience for your questions, which you can be posting electronically if you can figure out the directions, which we were struggling with at the table. Michael is the chairman and CEO of Merrick Ventures, a technology investment company that has helped transform through internet technology the industries of manufacturing, financial services, and healthcare. He is also the chairman of Rapports, which owns the Chicago Sun-Times and over 40 regional publications. Michael is the first vice chairman of the Economic Club and has served on the club's board of directors since 2004. A technologist and the founder of Click Commerce, Michael was an early pioneer of enabling business-to-business commerce through the internet and is often credited as the father of the extranet. He has received numerous entrepreneurship awards from Ernst & Young, KPMG, and CEO, and is dedicated to developing future generations of leaders and entrepreneurs through two programs he has founded, the 12A Fund, that's clearly not right, is it? So the I2A Fund, which helps Chicagoland's most promising startups and Merrick Momentum Awards, which is held annually to honor Chicago's top 3-year-old companies. Michael is a Henry Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute and is a director on the Rand Corporation Health Board of Advisors. He serves on the boards of the Chicago Community Trust and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital and Northwestern Memorial Hospital Foundation. He is also director on the board of trustees of the Museum of Science and Industry, Northwestern University, the Field Museum, Big Shoulders Fund, Joffrey Ballet, and the Lyric Opera. I'm tired just reading all those, Michael. Dick Costolo is Chief Executive Officer of Twitter, the real-time information social network and microblogging service. Dick joined Twitter in 2010 as Chief Operating Officer with responsibilities for overseeing day-to-day operations and became CEO in October of 2010, a job that is rumored to have been first offered to him over a private Twitter message by its co-founder, Evan Williams. Dick has roots in Chicago. After graduating from the University of Michigan with a degree in computer science in 1985, he turned down job offers from several big computer companies to move to the Windy City. Here he joined the Annoyance Theater as an improvisational comedian and took a job at Anderson Consulting just to keep his comedic edge up to supplement his part-time improv work. At Anderson, Dick worked on systems integration consulting and development projects. The web was just starting to gain traction in 1983, and Dick wanted to be a part of it. Anderson at the time considered the web a fad, not useful for business, so when denied more work on web projects, Dick left to start his first company. In 1993, he co-founded Burning Door Networked Media, a web design and development consulting company which was later acquired by Digital Knowledge Assets. In 1999, he co-founded and was CEO of his next venture, Spy On It. The web page monitoring service was sold to 724 Solutions in September 2000 for $54 million. In 2003, the same all-star founding team of Dick Costolo, Eric Lunt, Steve Olakowski, and Matt Shobe went on to start FeedBurner, a digital content syndication platform. Dick served as CEO of FeedBurner until the company was sold to Google in 2007. At Google, he was group product manager responsible for social media ads. Now at Twitter, Dick is responsible for the growth and management of the overall business, which in just 6 years has grown to a multi-billion-dollar company with over 140 million active users worldwide who generate more than 400 million tweets today. I'm sure today it'll be 500 million because of this luncheon. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dick Costolo.
Thank you. I thought I would start off by, first of all, when it was mentioned that we had to read the instructions at the table to ask questions, I didn't have to read the instructions at the table. I thought I would start off by giving a short version of a talk I gave for the first time on Friday in Ann Arbor called The Digital Agora. It was an hour-long talk. I'll tighten it up to 10 or 15 minutes and then have Michael come up and go through questions. So the talk I gave was this. In ancient Greece, there was this marketplace, the agora, that people would go to discuss the issues of the day, to have conversations about the issues of the day, and to share news with each other. News then was multi-directional, right? I would go to the agora, and someone would say to me, someone stole Eumenides' goat. And I would say, oh, my aunt broke her ankle. And then we would go back to our respective communities and tell each other what was going on. So things went on that way for centuries. The town square was where people discussed political issues and had dialogue and conversation about the news. And then along comes the printing press and the advent, really, of broadcast technology. And all sorts of interesting things start to happen to the way news is spread and shared. One, the speed with which news is spread and shared starts to pick up as you move from word of mouth to the printing press, to radio, to television. You get ever faster and faster and faster. Two, the information starts to spread more uniformly, farther than it used to. It used to be the case that I would tell Mike, Mike would tell Phil, Phil would tell, and by the time it got even 4 or 5 miles away from the original source, it wouldn't be humanity's goat died. It would be someone stole humanity's goat herd, and he might not. No one knows where he is. So you don't have the telephone problem anymore with the advent of broadcast technologies, and all these other fascinating things start to happen with broadcast technology that improve the distribution of news, always optimizing for removing the friction from time and space in the distribution of news. But along with all that, we lose a bunch of things. We lose this inside-out view of content. And what I mean by that is the news or the information or the conversation from the people that are participating in it. We lose that. The information starts to come to us through a filter, through a reporter, through a broadcaster at a game, or an announcer in the booth during a debate. We lose the multi-directional capability. We have the illusion of multi-directional capability with things like talk radio and so forth, but of course you've got the filter deciding who can call in and what questions they ask, and ultimately they can be turned off by the filter at any time. So the fascinating thing about Twitter for all of us who work in the company is this. It is another broadcast technology that completely obliterates all of the friction of time and space, so that now there is zero lag between something happening and it being talked about or spread or discussed on Twitter. And in fact, Twitter is frequently now the first place it's talked about or discussed or made, the news is made. And of course, it's global. It's immediately shared around the world. I have a bunch of visualizations, which I should have brought with me, that are things that our analytics team have built that show the speed of communication on Twitter. I'll give you a couple of just silly little examples. In the UK-France Euro match in this past summer's soccer championship, when the first goal was scored, there were tweets about that goal from, I believe, about 80 countries around the world in every single time zone within 3 seconds. So keep in mind it's 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in some of those countries. And so the fascinating thing about this removal, this complete obliteration of time and space is this. While being a new broadcast technology, like print, like radio, like television, because we've added back in the multi-directional capability where it's now not being any longer filtered through a third party, and because of the removal of that filter, Twitter actually complements all these other broadcast capabilities. What used to happen was they would displace the previous capability, or to a large extent displace or disintermediate the previous capability. Now what we're seeing is Twitter acts as an amplification of that other capability. I'll give you a bunch of examples. I'll give you a few examples so that we can start doing questions. During the Olympics, there were a bunch of what we'll call the digerati, sort of the technology experts out in Silicon Valley and in New York, who would say things on TV like, it's really stupid that NBC is tape delaying the Olympics, because what's going to happen is the moment the event happens, the people who are at the event are going to tweet what happened, and in fact what happened was that the participants themselves were tweeting what happened. Ryan Lochte would get out of the pool and talk about the fact that he won, and all this stuff happened in real time as it happened, and meanwhile NBC is going to show the race tonight at 8 p.m. So not everybody, all these digerati folks were tweeting with this hashtag NBC fail, basically making fun of the fact that NBC is showing this thing later on. But the fascinating thing that happened was that NBC had the highest rated Olympics in 36 years. Why did that happen if we all already knew what was going on? What we see more and more, and we see it at Twitter now all the time, is that Twitter becomes the shared experience, the conversation about the thing that we want to watch, whether we're watching it right now or we're going to watch it later. And in fact, the NBC folks would tell you that anecdotally, and then with the data, what they found was people would hear on Twitter during the day from the athletes or people at the games things like, hey, the women's 4x100 meter relay team set a world record today. And then people who never watched women's track and field would go home and say, hey, we got to turn on the Olympics tonight because the women's 4x100 meter relay team sets the world record. Or I want to see what Ryan Lochte did. He and Michael Phelps were going back and forth on Twitter today. Let's watch the race. So it acts as this fascinating complement to these other broadcast communication platforms with all sorts of amazing implications for public policy and the way laws are made and the way these communication platforms work. I'll give you a couple more examples of that. One is during the debates this year. During the first debate this year, well, I'll set some context for it. In 2010, we set a record at Twitter that summer during the World Cup at the time for tweets per second of 3,000 tweets per second. And it was on two occasions. One, when Brazil scored their first goal in the World Cup, and everyone in Brazil tweeted goal with a G and 137 O's and an A and an L. And then when Japan scored their first goal in the World Cup, and everyone in Japan did the same thing. About 3,000 tweets per second. Of course, those spikes only lasted for a second or two. During the first debate, during the first Obama-Romney debate, we were well over 8,000 tweets per second for the first hour. Over 8,000 tweets every second for the first hour about the debate. And so if you think about the implications of that for broadcast technologies, no longer do the TV commentators need to say things like, let's go to Frank Luntz, who's in this box, this room next to us, with 8 people who represent America, and Frank's going to tell us what everybody in America thought about the debate tonight. Instead, they go to Twitter and say, when Romney said XYZ about Big Bird, look what happened on Twitter. And there were 4 Big Bird accounts created immediately after that saying, we'll work for food, and on and on and on. Immediately, in the immediate after, there were 4 parody Big Bird accounts created within 90 seconds of Romney making that comment. So the reaction is instantaneous, and these broadcast technologies are starting to understand how to leverage what's happening on Twitter to amplify what they're trying to do in their own programming. So Twitter is the shared experience for what's happening on air. David Carr, the journalist for the New York Times, after Hurricane Sandy, asked his followers on Twitter, hey, I'm writing a piece for the New York Times about how people communicated during the hurricane and whether you think Twitter was useful or ended up causing more rumors to be spread than beneficial, et cetera. And his followers on Twitter helped him write that column. And as I'm happy to report, it turns out, and this has been researched by a number of organizations and researchers around the world, while Twitter sometimes is a place where a rumor gets started, there are lots of ways rumors get started, as we get bigger and bigger and bigger and have hundreds of millions of people using the platform, it becomes particularly effective at dispelling rumors. Because someone might say, oh, this particular subway station is on fire, and someone's actually at that subway station, takes a picture of it and tweets it and says, no, it's not. So Carr actually wrote his entire piece of his reporting about the hurricane and Twitter's impact on it from his followers on Twitter. So again, I'll close my comments with that has these amazing implications for the way policy is written, the way communications law is written, et cetera, for the following reason. It used to be the case that if the government wanted to make sure that the media didn't talk about something, they issued an injunction against that government. There happen to be kinds of injunctions in the UK, in the United Kingdom, called super injunctions. And a super injunction is an injunction where a person gets the courts in the UK to tell the media, not only can you not talk about this thing, but you cannot talk about the fact that we told you that there's an injunction preventing you from talking about this thing. It's called a super injunction. Someone might get one because there's a rumor going around they had an affair, and they get the press. They get a super injunction against the press to stop talking about that. What happens now on Twitter is someone finds out about it anyway, tweets the actual news or rumor with hashtag super injunction, and everybody except the press starts talking about it. So you can't tell everyone in the country, don't talk about this. And again, as you think about the different kinds of communication law and policy, certainly even here in the US, it has enormous implications for the way we think about crafting that law and the way we think about the future of communications and broadcast technologies. So with that, that's my super speedy version of my 1 hour talk in Ann Arbor, and I'll invite Michael up to ask me questions. By the way, let me just also add, I don't know where Steve and Eric and Matt are sitting, but we always referred to ourselves as an all-star team. Always. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Can I tweet Oprah that, oh, I don't think I'm on. Am I on? Now, can you guys hear me? Oh, there we go. I was just going to tweet Oprah that I have you. Have you been interviewed by Oprah yet?
I have not been interviewed by Oprah.
That's so nice. Hold on. Let me send her a little message right now. No, so first of all, my questions are not here, which they're supposed to be here, but they're not appearing. So I need to tell you that, Megan, there's no questions here. So I'm just going to start with some questions. Okay. So are they up there too? Wow, okay. Well, that's actually kind of fun. I didn't know they'd be in both places. So do you want me to read this or do you want to read it?
I'll read it. When did you first recognize Twitter as a world-changing technology, and what caused this aha moment? So there were a bunch of different instances in the history of the company in which the way we realized the breadth of and scope of what was possible continued to become broader and broader. I would say that I remember it was before I got to the company, the team was scheduled to do was planning to do some scheduled maintenance and take the site down one night for a couple of hours, and got a message from the State Department asking that we not do that so that people in Iran who were protesting could still use Twitter. That was a real, I think for the guys, Biz and Ev and Jack there at the time, a real, the State Department's on the phone, a real, there are only 20 or 30 people in the company at that point working in the startup space, and the State Department calls. I think that was a real aha moment. And then certainly in the early days of the platform, when it became public that Ashton Kutcher and CNN were kind of racing to 1 million followers, that generated a ton of interest in the platform, and that was a bit of a fun moment. I think another one of the really big seminal moments for the company was in a couple of natural disasters that took place a little while ago now, one more recently than the other. The earthquake in Haiti, and then the earthquake and ensuing tsunami in Fukushima, Japan, where Twitter became the lifeline, the way that people broadcast to their family, their friends, people around the world, what was going on with them, whether they were okay, where they were. And then in Japan, it really became interesting because the government started to use Twitter to broadcast things like train schedules, whether power was on or not yet in certain neighborhoods. And in fact, the Fukushima reactor itself started tweeting radiation levels in the area on a regular basis. So those were really kind of stepping stones in our realization of what was possible with the platform.
So Dick, you spent many years in Chicago as an improvisational comedian at Second City and the Annoyance Theater. And then you followed the traditional path of most improvisational comedians and became the CEO of a social media company with over 500 million users. How in the world did that happen?
I don't know how it happened. Let's see. I think the thing that I would say about that is, at the time I got my computer science degree at Michigan, the computer science department was actually in the art school, the literature, science, and art school. So when I was a junior and senior, I had to take these arts credits in order to have enough credits to graduate. And I decided I would take something where I didn't have to do homework because I wanted to be able to spend my time, on the programming courses and so forth. And so I took these theater classes because I thought, this will be great. I'll go in and act in class, and I won't have homework, and I'll get my arts credits. And it ended up becoming so fun for me and such an amazing experience that I started doing stand-up at the school my senior year at the student union. And then when I graduated, I remember talking to my parents and telling them I'm not going to take any of those offers. I'm going to go to Chicago and try to get into Second City. And there was a great deal of weeping at the time. But you know, it's helped me tremendously with things like not, you know, I had someone ask me, I was getting ready to do a CNBC interview. It was like one of these 5-minute, like, when are you going to go public things, which I never answer. And I was getting ready to go on and tell them that I wasn't going to answer when we're going public. And the producer said, you know, are you nervous about being on TV? And I started laughing and saying, I've been booed by 2,000 drunk Australians on, like, with 50
Who
minutes
hasn't, really?
with
Who
50
hasn't?
minutes left to go in a show. So I can stare into a camera and say I'm not going to tell you when we're going public.
Nice. So Twitter has become a showcase for the quick wit. So as a comedian yourself, do you find the humor and sarcasm on Twitter fulfilling?
Well, yeah, definitely. I think that when you talk to comedians who use the platform, a couple interesting things happen. One is they will tell you, and these are, you know, professional comedians like Sarah Silverman and Conan O'Brien and so forth. They'll tell you, every time I want to test out a joke on Twitter, when I write it and it's longer than 140 characters, my first reaction is, oh man, if I only had like 5 more characters, I've got this great joke. And they'll go and work on it and edit it and work on it and edit it. And once they get it down to 140 characters or less, they always say it's a much better joke, it's a much funnier joke. So that's interesting in and of itself. There's something magical about the constraint or the number of characters, 140 being particularly compelling for English language humor. There are also a bunch of people who really have gotten to be celebrities and gotten development deals purely through their use of Twitter. Kelly Oxford and the guy who tweets under the handle Bad Banana are 2 that come to mind that are incredibly funny on the platform and do it consistently.
So I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 1,000 right now. What number would come to your head?
140.
Okay, well, fine. So, God, you can see around corners
Yes.
and through walls. Okay, why 140?
Well, first, the technical reason that it was first 140 characters was because the service was originally envisioned and has now certainly become a mobile-specific service. And in order to function optimally on mobile when it was first created, the interoperability between mobile operators meant that text messages longer than 160 characters got truncated. And in fact, specifically between operators in the US and Canada, any message longer than 160 characters was truncated to 160. So the guys, and when I say the guys, I mean Ev, Biz, and Jack, the guys who started the company, conceived of it as 140 characters for the tweet, 15 characters for the user ID, and they left 5 characters for whatever they would forget that they would need to add later on, and we never ended up using those. So now that that restriction is no longer required, I get asked all the time if we'll ever lift that constraint. And the easy answer to that is no. The constraint is proven to be this amazingly magical number that makes it easy for people to communicate an idea without having to feel like they've got to write 4 paragraphs, and yet is long enough, is sufficient enough to be able to create a complete thought.
Well, as you heard in that write-up on me when they first started, you know, I'm one of the owners of the Chicago Sun-Times, and there's a whole group of us here. I have a lot of owners here, that's how we got it together. What is your relationship with the traditional media? How are you going to help save broadcast television, radio, and especially newspapers? How can you help?
I'm glad I started off with the comments I started
Yes,
off with.
that's
I mean,
right.
I think we are absolutely 100% complementary to traditional media in every way: radio, television, print journalism. The tweet serves as this 140-character caption to something richer, something more with more context. And that can be a full-length article. It can be a broadcast that we're watching right now, where Twitter is simply the place we're talking about what we're seeing on air, on and on and on. So I think that the content sources, content providers, media companies, broadcasters that really understand this are doing a great job taking advantage of it. NBC is a fantastic example with what they did during the Olympics, understanding that by embracing Twitter and broadly leveraging it and using it across everything they were doing was a much, much smarter way to deal with us than hopefully no one will use Twitter and then they'll see it for the first time tonight. And I think they were rewarded with the highest rated broadcast in 36 years.
So, speaking of social media, can you discuss your relationship and how it works with both LinkedIn and Facebook? And can you ask Mark Zuckerberg to come here too? We actually need Mark to stop by.
I can ask Mark to come here. He won't do it, but I can ask him.
You should ask.
The great thing about technology entrepreneurs, I think, and I think it's true here in Silicon Valley and everywhere, frankly, is even if companies are competing in some regard, we still have like great relationships with each other, personal relationships with each other. I know Mark and Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn well, and those guys are amazing guys, and they're doing a great job running their companies. And Facebook is more of a competitor, purely in the context, I think, of advertising sales. We both compete for the same kinds of advertisers. It's much less a competitor in the product itself. Facebook is more used for person-to-person or communications among friends, and Twitter is much more of a broadcast platform. I follow the San Francisco Giants, but I'm not friends with the San Francisco Giants as much as I might wish that were the case. So the difference in the asymmetric following model and the public nature of Twitter and the symmetrical friendship model and generally private nature of Facebook means that people use them much, much differently. LinkedIn, I think, is even more a case of we don't really compete at all. We don't compete with those guys for advertisers. We don't compete with them for people's time.
So, continuing that, does the continuing growth in the mobile social media make it less profitable for companies like Facebook and Twitter, and how does it work for you?
Well, for us, it's fantastic. I mean, as I just said, when we first started, the very first messages had to work on mobile. In fact, they have to be able to be broadcast to the weakest signals on the cheapest phones in the farthest reaches of the world. That's one of the reasons Twitter was so successful in Haiti, where people just have prepaid phones and were only able to text. They were still able to use Twitter via their prepaid phones with text messaging. So the move to mobile for us has been fantastic from a monetization perspective. We designed our advertising engine to work natively in mobile because we knew when we created it, it had to go everywhere the tweets went. You've got other companies who have to convert their advertising model to a mobile model. And to the extent their models consist of the formats of the ads being different than the content that's being displayed, or the location of the ads being different than the content that's being displayed, that's very, very difficult because you've got a much more constrained real estate on the mobile device, and you now have to figure out how to take this different form factor that probably didn't get displayed with the content and merge them together into this mobile device. The Twitter ad platform has always been the ads are just tweets that companies are broadcasting to amplify and reach more people, and the ads slide right into the tweet stream. So that works just as well on the website as it does on a mobile device, as it does on a tablet. So we don't have to worry about whether iOS or Android or a 7-inch tablet or an X-size tablet is going to be more popular than another. Whichever of those happens to be more successful, our ads work well on all of them.
So how big is Twitter? How many people do you have? What are your sales? What's your profits? We're not going to tell anybody. Just, it's good.
Yeah.
We're all,
So,
it's like Vegas here.
Yeah.
It stays here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay.
But
so
we're about 1,400. Well, we're just over 1,400 people right now. Over 1,000 of those in our world headquarters in San Francisco, downtown San Francisco. A bunch of folks here in Chicago, in sales and marketing here in Chicago, and then other offices around the world are New York, London, Tokyo, and we'll be dramatically expanding those, I would say, is a fair thing to say, next year. About half the company is engineers, so of that 1,400 people, 700, a little more than 700 are engineers. It turns out to be an incredibly a difficult challenge when you've got, during the night of the election, not the debates now, but the election, there was a moment where we were serving over 1.2 million timeline streams, user streams, complete streams every second to over 8 million different users every second. So when you've got all this information pouring in at over 10,000, 12,000 tweets per second, you've got to organize it chronologically and fan those out to that many people every second. It turns out to be a remarkable engineering challenge. So that's what those people all do. And the answer to your second question is the beauty of being a private company, as I said before, is that we don't have to tell our competitors how well we're doing.
So what is the possibility of you staying? Do you think you're going to be private? Do you think Twitter's going to go public someday? How do your investors feel?
I'll tell you, and I say this sincerely, we have not had a single conversation at a board meeting about being a public company. We haven't. We think about much more strategic and long-term notions of the importance of what we're doing as a business. What is our strategic focus? Can we do this and this third thing, or should we just try to focus on A and B? How do we make sure that we're providing the kinds of capabilities that users want while continuing to focus on the beauty of the simplicity of Twitter that's made it so popular? So those are the kinds of things we talk about when we talk about the strategic perspective of the company, where we're going. You know, we raised a bunch of money last year in a private financing, and we don't need to raise money again for a while.
Okay, so every entrepreneur gets asked this question when they're private or public. So what could kill Twitter? How do you get killed? How does someone kill you? Bill Gates called me.
I don't worry about that stuff. You know, I don't think about the business that way. I think about the business in the context of we've got these goals, and I stand up in front of the company and I try to explain to them why, not what we have to do. It doesn't do any good to stand up in front of people and say, here's what you have to do. The reason I have 700 engineers is that I want them to tell me what we have to do. I want to stand up in front of them and say, here's why we must achieve what we must achieve. This is why we have to do that. And so my job is to set the direction of where we're going and then have those guys all tell me how we're going to get there. It's never in the context of worrying about, gosh, you know, if those guys do X, Y, Z, then what are we going to do? You can't drive by looking in the side view mirror and trying to figure out what somebody else is going to do.
So at lunch today, you were talking about, John Canning asked you a question about where can you not get Twitter, and you told us about 2 countries. You want to review who are the 2 countries in the world?
So we're blocked in China and Iran. China has what Eric Schmidt likes to call the Great Firewall. I've heard Eric refer to several times, which basically have the ability to block whatever they want to block. Nonetheless, there are still hundreds of thousands of people in China who use Twitter. They just tunnel out to VPNs, virtual private networks, in Korea and other places and access Twitter that way. And unfortunately, I mean, you know, look, with the new government there, they're not going to be letting us in there anytime soon either. Facebook is blocked as well. It turns out when you run a service that proves to be particularly good at helping people organize rebellion, it's not particularly well suited to being unblocked in countries that might not want to see that. And so, you know, I think that I've gotten the kind of the follow-up question before, well, what are you guys going to do about that with China? What do you think you can do? I think that the short answer there is we'll just wait and, you know, look, eventually people will understand the benefits of these kinds of capabilities and we'll be allowed to operate there. I don't know how long that will be, though. It could be a long time.
So one last question.
Looking at your watch. I apologize.
Well, yeah, because I know I'm going to get the signal. So we're speaking here at the Economic Club of Chicago. And what advice do you have for these leaders of our business community here to make our city even more attractive, not just for entrepreneurs, but for companies like you to actually reside here, where we get 1,200 of your 1,400 employees here?
Yeah, so I think it's all about access to talent. Like, you want to be able to recruit great engineers, great designers, those kinds of people. And I'll try to be more specific than that. With the migration from the web to mobile and native applications, one of the skill sets that's becoming increasingly increasing demand is interaction designer, because on mobile, on native applications on mobile, the design and the interaction design is so important to the way people use it. It's not just about clicking on a link and going to the next page. It's about the gestural interface and swiping and pinching and animation. And those competencies are going to be extremely valuable. So there's asymmetric value in having fantastic designers. So to the extent the universities can educate those kinds of people, they will be in increasing demand, and companies will go where those people are. The second thing I would say on the software engineering front, and a bunch of the folks in the room in technology companies will know this, not all engineers are created equal. Some also add asymmetric value. And it's increasingly the case that a bunch of the bigger companies in Silicon Valley that I know of are using open source software. And there are certain kinds of open source software for which there are only a finite, very small, finite number of people who can contribute, if you will, to the base the base code base. And these people are called committers. And when we try to recruit a committer to a specific kind of open source software we are in extremely competitive situations with companies like Facebook and Google and others. So to the extent you can educate those kinds of people, committers to these really powerful open source pieces of software, those will be extraordinarily valuable, and people will absolutely open offices here in order to have those kinds of people. I mean, I can tell you it's just getting to the point where it's almost ridiculous how competitive it's getting for engineering talent. Particular kinds of engineers. I've taken the time to get on the phone with a new graduate from a university on the East Coast that we wanted to come work at Twitter because of some particular skills she had. And I thought, well, I'm going to close the deal because the CEO's calling her, and she's going to get on the phone and say, I can't believe what an honor it is to that you're calling me, and I'm going to say, I know, you really should be honored, and so she was very polite. She was very polite, and we had this conversation, and I was really selling hard. And at the end of the conversation, she said, it's just been so great to talk to you and Mr. Zuckerberg and the leaders at Google. And I'm like, oh my God, it's unbelievable. And this is a person who's, I didn't get called from the manager of the company I got offers from when I was graduating. So to the extent you can educate these people with these particular skills, companies will move here because they'll have to.
Well, we're going to go to the questions, but first there's about 700 members in the room. And my real question, is it age or education of why people don't know how to do this?
Don't know how to use Twitter?
Yeah, don't know how to Twitter, because no one understands the instructions. How many of you are doing this right now? How many understood it? God, is it too much education?
Here's the
too much age?
Here's the deal. Here's what I think the answer to your question is. There is still too large a gap between awareness of Twitter and engagement on Twitter. And I had this conversation with this New York Times reporter who put it, I love the way he put it. And you can agree with him or not, but these are his words. He said, you start out using Facebook and you get it right away and you're using it every day and you're on there all the time. And then after a couple years, you kind of get Facebook fatigue and you just stop going there and looking at it. And with Twitter, you start off with Twitter fatigue, and you don't get it, and you can't understand what the hashtag is, and why do people put these @ signs in front of things, and I don't understand why people are using this thing. And then as you start to get it, you become more and more and more hooked, and then once you're in there and fully engaged, you never leave. And in fact, our data backs that up. We see that once people are core users of Twitter, they're using it on the web, they're using it on a mobile device, they've got one of the apps installed, the churn rate goes to almost nothing, 0. Once you're in, you're in. We have to do a much better job of making it easier to understand and get when you first come there.
So are more people right now on Twitter today, are more people reading or putting data in? What's your percentage?
Yeah, it used to be the case that, a couple of years ago, it was by far the case that the vast majority of people on Twitter were tweeting. It is now the case that over 40% of our active users, people who are logging in all the time, don't tweet at all and have never, and in fact, many of which have never tweeted. So over 40% now don't tweet. And that's fine. That's the way it should be. If it's going to become this very, very mainstream, global, shared experience about what's going on right now. Some people are going to want to use it just to see what that is and listen. And that goes for companies too. You know, I'll talk to companies and CEOs who'll say, well, you know, I've got my full disclosure policy, I've got, you know, Reg FD, I can't be on there tweeting. The reality is that CEOs who are on the platform and using it regularly, mostly just to listen, get enormous value out of it. The CEO of O2, the mobile operator in the UK, said to me, he didn't say it to me, he said it to one of my people who said it to me, just to be specific. He said, Twitter is like being on the floor and walking the floor with your customer 24 hours a day. So if you can use it like that as a listening post, you derive enormous value from it, and you don't have to publish to use it.
So now that you said we're voyeurs, you know, what are your thoughts about real identities versus the pseudo-identities, and how important are they to free speech?
Yeah, so I think what this question is asking is, on Facebook you have to use your real name, and on Google Plus you have to use your real name, but on Twitter you can tweet pseudonymously, with anonymity.
I like it. Yeah, that word. I can't believe I pronounced that.
You can use a pseudonym on Twitter. It's critically important to free speech, and in fact, we saw that across North Africa when in January, when people started organizing protests, first in Tunisia and later in Egypt and elsewhere. It was people that were able to use pseudonyms who were able to effectively organize protests. Look, there are lots of places in the world where political speech is not only not welcome, it's punished. It is absolutely the case that there are people, I told you there are people in China who use Twitter despite the fact that we're blocked there. There's a woman in China who simply retweeted a sarcastic comment that somebody else made on Twitter, and she was sent to a labor camp for a year. The Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, who designed the beautiful bird's nest building in Beijing that was used during the Olympics, has been imprisoned for his use of Twitter. So it's critical to us that people be able to tweet with anonymity. Of course, the flip side to that is it ends up making it easier for people to be abusive on the platform and saying things to people like politicians and celebrities and athletes that they don't like, because they can do so behind a veil of anonymity. So there's a bunch of work we have to do at Twitter to make sure we're filtering that stuff out while fostering and enabling political speech.
So I have money riding on this next one. So did the original Twitter platform really only take 2 weeks to build, or is that legend?
Well, I think it's a little bit urban legend, although if you talk to Biz and Jack, they might tell you that they were able to really get the first, you know, it kind of depends on how you think about when 2 weeks starts. But where in the process 2 weeks starts. But I guess those guys would probably tell you that that's generally true-ish.
True-ish. So reality distortion. Okay, great, Megan. You have more questions, Megan? Megan's in charge of bringing the Twitter questions into us. Are you going? Oh, we do? Okay, here it is. Wow, this is a good question. What is the next innovation after the age of the network?
What's the next innovation after the age of the network? I think I'll speak generally to technology and innovation right now. I think a couple interesting things are happening. One is, as we move from the web to mobile, it is increasingly the case that people are looking for apps for very, very specific use cases, and I think that will continue. You might say, well, what are you going to have, 200 apps on your phone? And the short answer is, I think, you know, yes, we're seeing disaggregation, not consolidation, and you'll have more and more kinds of apps on your phone. Look, it used to be the case 5 years ago that if you heard the lyrics to some song and you were listening to some song and you wanted to know what it was, you went and typed the lyrics into Google and it told you, and now you hold Shazam up and it tells you what the song is you're listening to. So there'll be more and more of that appification of everything, where you just are driven to specific use cases for specific apps. I think, speaking more broadly about innovation, one of the things we see from younger and younger people is that they are increasingly unconcerned about what they share publicly. Increasingly unconcerned about what they share publicly. Even when it is shown to them that you just entered this into the permanent record, they don't care. They simply don't care. And they might care X years from now, but they don't care right now. And I think we'll see more and more and more of that broader notion of everything being much more widely shared and publicly shared. Things that we would have never thought anyone would be willing to share, they'll start sharing openly, freely, and 24/7. You see apps like Highlight that are like, you can just find people that are right near you right now and what their IDs are and who they are so you can talk to them. Apps that people wouldn't have thought about using 5 years from now. 5 years ago, why do I want to tell everyone where I am at any particular time of day? That people are using more freely, more regularly, and we'll see a lot of that.
Well, you're kind of answering the question that's there, but what's the downside to all this communication? But let me ask you this: I had a friend of mine who's getting vetted, and I know he doesn't admit he's a friend of mine.
I don't even know what that is.
That's part of the vetting process for some government post, and he told me that if you have a Facebook page, they don't even start the vetting anymore. It's one of the first questions to find out if you have a Facebook. So what happens? How is society going to change, do you think, in the next 10 years? Because all the kids are posting their drunken binge or every girlfriend or boyfriend they've ever had. They're sexting. What happens? It's on you. They can do that with you, What happens now? Do we change as a society? Do we let people make mistakes and not hold it? What's going to happen? How's the world going to change?
Look, here's the deal. The great thing about these platforms is that you don't see a two-dimensional cardboard cutout of the person anymore. You get a 360-degree view of the whole person. For some people, that's a great thing, and for other people, there are probably some things they should think about sharing less. But I think that that's fine. I'll give you an example of what I mean. I sat next to a guy on a plane, we were talking about Twitter, and he said, the interesting thing about Twitter for me has been when Rupert Murdoch started tweeting, I felt like it was interesting to see that he had this perspective on the Euro crisis that was richly informed about what was going on in Spain at the particular moment and how Merkel was going to deal with that. And then he started tweeting about Iran and what was going on there, and he seemed to be richly informed about that. And I started thinking of this guy as a person, not just as this cardboard cutout of the head of News Corp. So I think that's all great. Yes, of course you have to think about the implications of what you're broadcasting to the world. I talked to a GM of one of the NBA franchises who said, listen, can you guys just have someone come and talk to the team about best practices? And I said, well, that's fine, I can do that, but why are you distraught about that? And he said, look, my guys will do things like, headed on a 3-week West Coast road trip, house sure is gonna be empty while I'm gone for 3 weeks, and an hour later, guess what? The police are calling him, telling him your house is being robbed. So, we just have to help people understand what the implications are for, you're not just telling your friends in these platforms, especially Twitter, which is a broadcast platform. You feel like you're telling your friends, but you're telling the world. People will get used to that though, and they'll learn, and they'll quickly learn, and they'll get past it.
So when I asked Zuckerberg this question about my 14-year-old son, it was midnight in a bar, and I said, Mark, how would you convince my 14-year-old son not to have a Facebook page? And he said, well, let's just call him up. He's at the hotel, bring him over. I said, Mark, he's 14, we're in a bar. It's midnight. And so how do you tell a 14-year-old to do this? 14-year-olds, how do you manage a 14-year-old? You have a 14-year-old son?
I have a 14-year-old daughter.
Daughter, sorry, I have the son. You have
I don't
the
know, I just tell her not to be, just remember that the stuff you're doing is broadcast out there for everyone to see. It's not just, even if you're directing a response to your friend Chloe, everybody can see it. So just be thoughtful about that. And you know what? They might make that mistake once and then they won't make it again. So I don't worry about that stuff.
Okay, so I like this question. You've talked about this at lunch a little bit. What is it like to manage a business that wasn't meant to be a business?
It's fun because we got to sort of invent the monetization platform from the ground up. I think that, I remember John Doerr was asked about Google back in the early days, right? When they were really just getting started, and someone said to John Doerr, John Doerr's an investor at Kleiner Perkins, one of the first investors in Google, and also an investor in Twitter. And John was asked, hey, how are you guys going to make money at Google? And John's answer was, with traffic like this, we'll figure it out. And the benefit of managing a business like this that's growing its user base as fast as Twitter is growing is it was ultimately not the hardest problem in the world to figure out how to monetize the platform. You have all this attention there. You have a massive interest graph. And by interest graph, I mean we have a picture of all the accounts that everybody follows. In fact, not only do we have a picture of it, it's public. You can go look at all the accounts I follow. And that paints a very clear clear picture of the kinds of things I'm interested in. That turns out to be remarkably compelling to advertisers. Being able to target somebody based on their interests and inject your message into the real-time stream of what they're viewing, that was an easy, part of the equation.
So, we were talking about entrepreneurs earlier, about your company. Now, what advice would you give to the entrepreneurs in the room if they're trying to decide, am I going to start a company here in Chicago?
Yeah.
Or should I go to the Valley? We talked a little bit about this, or the West Coast. What's your advice to them?
It doesn't matter where you start your business. It doesn't matter. You'll see these entrepreneurs. I'll talk to entrepreneurs in San Francisco who will say, because they haven't done it anywhere else, well, it's impossible to do it anywhere else because you don't have the same network of people and all these other entrepreneurs out here to be able to talk to after work and so forth. And, listen, I don't like going out to dinner every night in San Francisco. I liked it when I was back here and it was, I could go home all the time. It doesn't matter where you start your company. As long as you have access to talent, you can do anything you want to do and scale it to be any kind of business you want it to be. You might hear from some investors, the Grubhub guys are here. Those guys have scaled that business here successfully without having to move. You might hear from some investors. In fact, you probably will hear from some investors in the early days. This would be a lot easier if you were in New York. This would be a lot easier in Silicon Valley. What you're hearing is, I don't think I know whether I want to invest in this company yet or not. Let's keep talking. Once they want to invest in your company, you could be in Berlin. They could care less. They want to get money into your company, and they'll come see you, and they'll fly out here for board meetings. Doesn't matter.
So we have a couple more time for a couple more questions. So we kind of hit on this, but what are the demographics of your users? Is it skewing older or younger?
So the question is it skewing older as the technology matures? The interesting thing about Twitter was that it started off indexing much, much older than other new technologies. So if you look at Facebook, obviously that started with university students because you couldn't sign up for Facebook if you weren't a university student in the early days. But you look at any of the sort of emergent social networking, social media applications, Snapchat, I mentioned Highlight, on and on and on, Pinterest. Maybe Pinterest is a little bit more like Twitter, but most of these things start off indexing super young and then migrate up and to an older group. Twitter started off older and got younger and younger. In fact, my daughter was telling me, I was asking my daughter about Facebook and Twitter, and she said, well, most of the kids and most of the freshmen and sophomores still all use Facebook, but a lot of the seniors use Twitter. So it's an interesting thing that it's kind of migrated down the age stack instead of migrated up like some of the other techs.
Well, this is kind of cool. How do Twitter's advertisers use archive tweets to tailor their marketing?
So the question, how do Twitter's advertisers use archived tweets to tailor their marketing? I think I'm gonna do the communications 101 thing and answer a different question that I want to answer. So the question that
Wait, we both repeated that question twice now. I feel like we're on Star Trek.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to answer it?
Well, I'll answer it, but you can tell me if it answers this question or another one. So the fascinating thing that advertisers are doing on Twitter now is they're advertising in a way they would have never, ever advertised, ever, even if you had gone to them a year ago and said, I predict that you'll send this kind of advertisement. I'll give you a couple examples. Taco Bell and Old Spice are tweeting to each other about their products as a way of advertising that's getting retweeted and rebroadcast thousands and thousands and thousands of times. I think the Old Spice account first tweeted to Taco Bell and said, your new so-and-so fire salsa is false advertising, there's no fire in it. And the Taco Bell account tweeted back, what old spices are there in Old Spice? And these things get picked. You couldn't go to the marketing department at Taco Bell 2 years ago and say, I got a great idea for a campaign. We're going to send a message out and put it in the Wall Street Journal about Old Spice. And yet that's what's happening on Twitter, and these conversations are fun, they're authentic, they're organic, and they're being amplified by the user base. I'll give you another example, the CEO of O2 that I mentioned. O2 is a remarkably advanced user of the platform. There was a user in the UK. O2 provides, much like AT&T here, mobile operator services, but also cable boxes and internet connectivity, et cetera. And this guy who had been a long-time user of Twitter He wrote a tweet to O2 that was written in extreme British street slang of the like Ali G variety. For any of you who are familiar with the British with the show
Big
Ali
fan,
G.
big fan.
Extreme British street slang. He wrote it in. And the O2 marketing department went and looked at the history of his tweets, and he didn't normally tweet like that. So they knew he was kind of being silly about he was tweeting that his O2 connection, internet connection was down, but again, in extreme British street slang. O2 tweeted back to him to turn off the router and turn it back on in extreme British street slang. Extreme British street slang. And that tweet was in all of the UK papers the next day, right? So here's an ad, didn't cost this guy's any time or energy to write. The guy in the marketing department who wrote it probably thought, I'm going to be fired the moment I hit send on this. But the next day, everyone in the country is talking about it. So it provides this fascinating way for advertisers and marketers to have an authentic tone of voice, an organic and new tone of voice with their customers that is compelling and fun and a way they could have never talked to their customers before.
Well, before I bring back Andrea, one last thing.
She's sneaking up on stage.
I see
That's
that
our
as
cue.
One
We've gotta
last
go.
comment
the
is
lights
that,
are going to start dimming,
so
and
the
then
secret
we really
to
got to shut
success
up.
for tech entrepreneurs is it's thick glasses and facial hair, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's what
Yes.
both men and women.
I don't know what to do with that.
Okay.
All right.
See ya.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very
Thank
much
you.
for coming.
On behalf of the Economic Club, I want to thank Dick Costolo and Michael Farrell for being here, and thanks for your terrific presentation. We learned a lot today, and with that, the meeting is adjourned. We look forward to seeing you at our next Economic Club event. Thank you.